Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the next edition of the Down Syndrome Center of Western Pennsylvania podcast. As you know, I'm your host, Dr. Kishore Velody, and today we are joined with a very special guest, who is Joan Medlen, who is a nutrition and dietitian expert, specifically in the area of Down syndrome, and she is going to be here to share her expertise with us today. Joan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, you're very welcome. This is fun.
Yeah, and we're going to have a lot of fun today. Joan and I know each other really well, and we may even crack some jokes during the podcast. So, but Joan, before we get too far into the podcast, even though I know you, could you share a little bit about your background for our listeners?
Absolutely. So I am, as Kishore said, a registered dietitian. They now call them registered dietitian nutritionists, so that you all know it's all about nutrition. And I've been a dietitian for 30 years. I've worked in every type of setting, from acute clinical care to long-term care to outpatient. And now my focus for the last, I'd say, 25 years has been on supporting families and people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, specifically Down syndrome. And that, of course, comes from having a 29-year-old young man who experiences Down syndrome and a variety of other labels. And it's been quite a journey. I've learned a lot. Much of what I share is very behavioral and teaches wellness and habits. That seems to be where the most assistance and support is needed on a day-to-day basis. Mm-hmm. And then much of what I share are lessons of what I wish I had known when Andy was younger.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I think for me, in our medical clinic, so many of the questions that we get, both from, younger age and older age, really does revolve around nutrition and diet and behavior. And, we had Dr. Stein on a few weeks ago on the podcast, but this is a wonderful way to address some of these other questions. For the infants, it's pretty easy for us. It's either breastfeeding or formula, when they're first born. And we certainly, we want to encourage breastfeeding as much as possible. For many families, breastfeeding a child with Down syndrome can be a real challenge. As you know, the mouth tone and things like that can make it hard for the babies to latch, but it's certainly not impossible. And in fact, we definitely do encourage it if the family is interested in breastfeeding. We definitely don't think that Down syndrome is a reason not to breastfeed, and with good lactation support, they're able to do that. We've had some families where they have a large family and 9 kids in a row were breastfed, and then the 10th one comes and mom has a little bit of a harder time because that child has Down syndrome. And so, but even with those situations, with great lactation support, the moms were able to do the breastfeeding as they had desired. But of course, we have great formula options these days, and so I don't want to take too much of the time talking about infant feeding with you, because I think I'd really love to get your ideas on some of these other age ranges that we're looking at. I think one of the things that we'll hear, Joan, is about like that toddler age child who is starting to exert some independence perhaps at the table and has become somewhat picky in their eating. What's your approach to this kind of picky eating, selective eating type of situation?
So there's a lot of things that are going on at that age. You're learning an awful lot. And I always start every workshop that I do, every consultation with a description of what's called the feeding relationship. And I do that because it's really important to understand our boundaries as well as our children's boundaries. And it even goes into adulthood when we're providing that support. So what that means is parents are responsible for the what, where, when, and how food is presented. And our kids are responsible for how much and whether or not they're eating it. And then for families of kids with disabilities, specifically Down syndrome, because we know usually from birth that we have something extra going on, we need to make sure that those who support us, those teachers, the speech path, the OT, the whole litany of people that we're visiting with in those early years, also know that that's how you're choosing to raise your child. The research is really strong around the feeding relationship for helping children grow up, learning how to listen to their body, understanding how to make food choices. And then there's a lot of good research that shows that if we step back and let children choose, self-select from a healthy option, that they end up balancing out their nutrient needs over time. It's hard to trust that, but the research is there. And then in my own anecdotal petri dish here at home, we see it even in Andy to this day. He does a very good job of choosing what he wants to eat, and we can tell when he's healing, he eats a lot of protein. He's a broccoli fanatic, and sometimes he won't eat it at all, and other times he eats a whole head all at once. You just kind of sit back and watch. Now, that doesn't mean we don't support it with an over-the-counter vitamin, but learning how to relax a little bit about it and focus on how to support them so that they're successful eaters is the first step. With a picky eater, the second step is to decide if they're really a picky eater or if there's a sensory issue going on or an oral motor issue. So I have a really nice chart that I put together that chronicles the chewing stages to be looking for, because it really doesn't go by age, it goes by development. And then you can see where your child is developmentally with eating and provide foods that aren't going to be a huge challenge for them, which helps them make that choice, that new food. Then on to that, after that, one of my questions would be, how many foods does your child eat? And we make a list of the foods. And that's actually really validating for moms, because they get to see how many foods their child actually does eat rather than what's not happening. And when you do that, for each food is a different preparation. So let's take a potato. French fries is one food. Mashed potatoes is one food. Scalloped potatoes is another food. So, you get a pretty long list when people are thinking that they've got a really picky eater. I have known children who only eat less than 20 foods with that definition. And that's when you truly have an issue. You need a feeding team at that moment. You need to have a group of people helping you. But I start there, and then I find the foods that the child likes, and then we start branching from that. I have a whole worksheet that we work through, because you have to think about it for a while. If your child's favorite food is a French fry, what can you do? Change it in one way physically that's a different food. So, Kishore, what's a food that's similar to a French fry but not a French fry?
Oh boy, a veggie stick?
Okay, that could work.
Yeah.
Because it's the same shape.
Yeah.
It might be the same color. It's going to crunch, so that'll be different. And it'll be cold instead of warm.
Yeah.
Try another one.
Oh my, I didn't know I thought the podcast was me asking you questions, Joan. Man,
no, it's a quiz.
All right. What else is like a French fry? How about a sweet potato fry?
There you go. So the difference nutritionally between a sweet potato fry and a French fry is huge. There's vitamin A, a whole bunch of vitamin A in a sweet potato. There's more fiber in a sweet potato. So you've already made one step. Another step would be to oven fry or to bake those French fries, the potato sticks or the sweet potato stick. And then a third option that people don't think about, but in my food tasting workshops everybody loves, is a parsnip. So you cut a parsnip in the shape of a French fry, a long skinny thing, and you spray it with a little vegetable oil, or you can put some olive oil on it and oven bake it, put a little salt on it. It's wonderful. It's sweet and tasty, and again, it has many more and different vitamins than a potato, and it has a little more fiber. So we've inched up the nutrition quality by just a smush.
I see. Doing that. So you're kind of working within their quote-unquote pickiness to find, even within that range, more things that they'll tolerate or more things that they'll accept.
Exactly. Okay. Actually, let's reframe it so that it fits with all the other language that parents hear. We're building on their strengths.
Yes. Okay.
So we match to their strengths, and then we expand from there.
So I think, that's certainly something that we see, especially I've seen in some of the younger age kids, and as they get a little bit older too, sometimes that kind of selective pickiness seems to be there. But the much bigger issue that we run into, at least that I run into, is overeating. The story I'll hear is the family will say after we eat dinner, he's always asking or she's always asking for seconds and thirds and always seems to want more and more and more. He's got an appetite that never ends. And so the families often ask me how to approach that. So let me ask you, how do you approach that?
Well, again, I approach it with a number of questions before I come up with an answer because no situation is going to be the same. So remember that, families, as you listen to the podcast. No situation is the same. But it can be a number of things. So first, you sort of ask the question, how often does your son or daughter get some quality time with the whole family? If you're having family meals, and that's a really important thing according to the research for development of all children, and that's the only time y'all get together, then maybe it's the experience they don't want to have end. Or if you're in a special restaurant, maybe it's the experience, the ambiance, the whatever is special to that person that they don't want to have end. Sometimes it's the experience of the food itself. If you think about, tell me one of your favorite indulgences, Kishore.
Oh, man. I would have to say flan, Mexican flan.
Mexican flan.
Yeah.
So if you only had like 2 bites of flan, would you maybe be craving a little bit more because that's not quite enough?
Yes.
Okay, so sometimes, and what is it about the flan that you like?
Oh man, it's like this this perfect combination of this soft and sweet and full of fat at the same time. Boy, I'm getting myself in trouble today. I don't eat flan all the time, but certainly something that I like.
For lunch every day. So the way you describe that, if you end an experience that gives you that much pleasure, whether it's too soon or you've had, technically you've had enough, it's a typical serving, you end that experience. Just like anyone, our kids will crave a little bit more, right? They want that experience to continue too. So it's not just the environmental experience or the connection with people, but sometimes it's the sensory experience that the food brings that they want to continue on. Another reason for them to want to eat more is because they want more of something, but they don't know what. Or they can't articulate what. They've never really figured it out. So some of what I do, I've learned over the last few years is it's very important to think about what's called mindful eating. And you can read a lot about mindful eating, and I try to stay away from the part where we thank the world for making our food. Not because that's not important, but because I want to get down to the brass tacks of the moment. And think about, so how do I help them understand their experience, to explain their experience, and to explain what they want? So, and how do I help them end the experience when it's an appropriate time by listening to their body? So we all have heard that it takes time for our brain and our stomach to talk to each other, right? Mm-hmm. So you want to make sure that you're explaining that to your child. You know what? It takes time for your brain to catch up to your stomach. How about we set the timer? I mean, this is an old school thing to do, but we set the timer for 20 minutes. And if you have one that doesn't make a noise, that would be great. And I think you could do that on your phones now. If not, you can download an app called Visual Timer, and that's really nice because it looks like a pie that's disappearing. Mm-hmm. And then it ends without beeping, so you're not telling them, okay, now we can eat. But at the end of the 20 minutes, you go do something during that 20 minutes with them. Stay engaged with them. Read a story, play a game, a video game, go for a walk, play with the dog, but do something with them. And then the time goes past, and the timer went off, but you didn't hear it because you didn't put the ding on, right?
Yeah.
Because the 20 minutes passed. You don't know how far past, but you can say, how do you feel now? Tell me what your body's telling you now. And they can start to realize, oh, I don't really need to eat that, but I want to eat that. So why do I want to eat that? It's a hard conversation. It's hard to slow down as a parent to do that. But if that's truly an issue, that's one. One of the ones I hear the most is that as soon as they finish breakfast, they want to know what's for lunch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. And then after lunch, what's for dinner, or what's for snack, or what are we doing for lunch tomorrow at school? And there's a number of things there. One is, they're anticipating something that they enjoy. But what I caught on to a long time ago was that it's also a way of marking time. So when breakfast is done, the next big thing is lunch.
Mm-hmm.
So we ask about lunch. And when lunch is done, the next big thing in the day is dinner. So it's not always that we're so hungry as it is that we just are asking about the next big thing. And parents, understandably, might feel like their kid's very, very focused on food because that's all they ask about as soon as breakfast over. They ask about lunch. But if we turn it around and what I do with folks is I have them make a menu board and they write down what they're serving for each meal on the day. So when they're coming in every 10 minutes to ask you what's for lunch or what's for dinner, you redirect them to the board. It might have to be pictures. Mm-hmm. So you spend some time with your camera. But then you redirect them to the board, and then they know where they can find that information. And then they go off and do something else.
Okay.
And it sort of diffuses the importance of it and just turns it into, I'm checking in. I can see that this is the deal. Okay, that looks like a good idea. I'm going to go off and do this other thing now.
I think that, it's just a fascinating approach, to look at it as from a behavioral phenomenon more than necessarily a medical issue that, children with Down syndrome just have a bigger appetite, which is something that families will find on the internet and things like that. So that's a really neat approach to take it that way.
I don't know that we have the research to support all that yet.
Yeah.
Do we?
Yeah.
So if we don't have research to support it, then I need to look at it and how can I structure the environment for their success?
Yeah. No, that's great. But let's say, what if somebody comes to you, and I'm sure as a nutrition dietitian expert, you get this where they're already obese. Let's say, they went for years and years and years, and now they're definitely meeting the definition, the criteria of overweight or obese. What's your approach to that? Is it different in terms of trying to get them back to a healthy weight? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm pretty pragmatic. First, I have to look at where we are in life, how old we are, what's going on in life, what are I spend time with the person. I often do what's called a person-centered plan, where we sit down and talk about what's important. It's not at all related to nutrition. It's sitting down so that I can understand what's important to them, and then I can balance better what's important to them and what's important for them, which is a person-centered technique. Uh-huh. And it helps me know where to focus first. So I often sit down with everybody involved with the person to see what's going on and where's the food coming from, what behavior might I be seeing, things along those lines. I actually have worked with someone who fits this description for a number of years, and we'll be doing a workshop at NDSC this year related to this topic. And what you'll see is a balance between, they're doing a lot of research and Christy's now 35. And so she's starting to experience issues related to growing older, and living with obesity. And I always start with, let's stop going up. Mm-hmm. Okay, can we stop the upward trend? Uh-huh. And then what is it that needs to happen in the day? And oftentimes, if families have listened to a man named David Petoniak, mm-hmm. he has a great quote, and he has some great ways of looking at things. But his quote that I love is, "Loneliness is the greatest disability." And I often look for that. Because we'll eat to feed our emotions sometimes, and loneliness is one of those things. Who will talk to us? The guy at the restaurant will talk to us, so we want to go to the restaurant. Or just any variety of those things. So I start looking at where can we make connections that aren't related to food. And then it is your standard weight loss approach. I try to get them to as healthy a place as I can get them. I've known a few families who've used bariatric surgery to deal with that. I'm waiting to see how that plays out in the long haul. Mm-hmm. I have reservations about it just because of the behavioral component to it. And as we know with people who do not have Down syndrome, bariatric surgery is not always successful over, say, a 10-year period. Yeah. If you don't deal with the underlying issues. Yeah. So that's and then I look at the health issues. That's the other piece. There are things that will make me walk away from my person-centered loving approach, to a more structured, we got to deal with this approach. And that would be things like diabetes or sleep apnea that is being treated, but nothing's doing any good, or they can't walk anymore, or they're having trouble doing activities of daily living because of their weight. I'm going to change my mind around that.
Yeah. No, that makes sense too.
In many ways, it's no different than what I would do with you, Kishore.
Oh, thank you.
After you eat all your flan.
Oh, I know, right? Now I'm going to get it at the next convention, I'm sure, when we run into each other again. You'll see me eating my favorite dessert and ask me about my behavior around that. No, this is actually, in all honesty, this is fantastic. This approach is certainly different than other folks' approach, and I think it makes a lot of sense, though. But Joan, I think at this point we're coming up on the end of our time for our podcast today. But I do have lots of other questions I was hoping to ask. I know that one of your areas of expertise also is in celiac disease and dietary management there, and so. But I don't want to rush through that. Would it be okay? Would you be able to come back for another podcast here in a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. I'd be happy to.
Great. I think that'll be great. We'll just do another podcast here at some point. But for our listeners, please stay tuned for that podcast. And thank you for listening in today. If you have any questions or if you have any other suggestions for a future podcast, please don't hesitate to contact us at downsyndromecenter@gmail.com. Again, that's downsyndromecenter@gmail.com. But until our next podcast, goodbye.